Hello. Hello. This is a random and another installment of Off One's Chest. I had a little bit of a thought about nostalgia. Basically, coming to terms with the past and how quickly time flies by, and how I came up with this realization was a few months ago, but didn't really understand how to really put it into words or how it affected me until I was watching WrestleMania this past year. And although it is May, and that happened in April or March, it happened in April, like April 1st or something like that. I looked at the Hall of Fame. Obviously, when you're a wrestling fan, you watch the Hall of Fame, and they announce who gets into the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame this year was really short. I think it was the shortest since 1993, and I bring this up because this was the first time I actually felt like, I felt like like an old person. And I'm 28. I'm not necessarily old, but in terms of wrestling, the emotion that came with seeing someone that I grew up watching retire or get into the Hall of Fame, in terms of like, wow, he's really been there for a long time. And I never really understood how I never understood that feeling after watching Hall of Fames for years until it happened to me. You know, I started watching wrestling in 2006. People around that regime of WWE was Edge, John Cena, Randy Orton, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Rob Van Dam, the list goes on. But then you had people on SmackDown like The Undertaker. Then you had Batista. Then you had people like CM Punk, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Mr. Kennedy, MVP. The list goes on, you know. And for a while, when they would do these Hall of Fames at WrestleManias, they would be honoring the legacy of people from the 80s, the 70s, and maybe even prior. I think the first WrestleMania I was ever a part of, in terms of, I got to watch it, was WrestleMania 25 on pay-per-view. My mom ordered it. It was the first time we got to see a WrestleMania. Actually, it was the first time we got to see a wrestling event with no commercials. That's the only thing we were concerned about. And man, we made a bunch of food. We sat there. We watched it. And the fact that it was in Texas was pretty cool too. But, we didn't go. We watched it on TV. I mean, of course, you have the event, WrestleMania. They had Kid Rock there for some reason. They had Edge, Big Show, John Cena. But in the middle of the show, they bring out the Hall of Famers. And this Hall of Fame had Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Von Erichs, they had, I might have to just look it up real quick, actually, because I really don't know, and I am getting to a point here. So you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, Ricky Steamboat, Bill Watts, Howard Finkel, Coco Beware, as well as the Von Erichs, the Funks, and I think that was it. So obviously some of these people I never heard of before, and I know that people who watched wrestling before me grew up on the Stone Colds. They grew up on The Rock. They grew up on Mick Foley, Dude Love, and all that, and the Mankind. They grew up on Ricky Dragon Steamboat. They grew up on Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, things like that. So when they see it, they're probably feeling like a kid again. And I never really grasped that concept because, years later, I'd be seeing these old guys that I've never heard of in the business before getting inducted and realizing that their careers started from, like the 70s and then the 80s, and they were big in the 90s and so on and so forth. But besides people who got injured, like, and people who retired, so like, of course, Shawn Michaels was way before my time, but he stayed well past when I was watching wrestling. But then he retired, and then you got people like Edge, who got in early because his neck injury. Beth Phoenix is another example. You know, I didn't necessarily grow up watching her, but she was there. So besides those people, the first time I ever felt like, man, this is like, I'm like old now, was I want to say probably 2020. I want to say 2017 because they had Kurt Angle. But when I started watching wrestling, Kurt Angle wasn't in the WWE. So that's why I say 2020. 2020, 2021. Because in 2020, they had JBL. And they also mentioned Batista, but he never. That was a weird thing. They never really announced it, or they announced it, but he never really like accepted it. So they delayed it, or they never did it. But for this, example, I'm gonna use JBL and Rob Van Dam and the Great Khali and people like that. So obviously JBL was, around during the Attitude Era in the APA, but I didn't know that. I knew him as the Texas, New York guy who had a lot of money. And how that ties in, full circle was at WrestleMania 25, he faced Rey Mysterio. And he lost Rey Mysterio and retired, or he quit. He quit. And then I just heard him on commentary a lot. In the games and the show and all that stuff. So when they announced that he was getting the Hall of Fame, I was like, wow, man, like, I grew up watching this guy. And the same thing that happens every year after that. 2020, JBL. 2021, Great Khali, Rob Van Dam. Now, I'm not excited about the Great Khali, but I'm just thinking, like, 2007 was the first time I saw him. And now, literally 14 years later, he's a Hall of Famer. Rob Van Dam is my favorite wrestler of all time. He's getting in there. 2022, The Undertaker gets in. Like, goodness gracious. And, 2023 is, let me think. Rey Mysterio gets in there, even though I think Rey Mysterio is mid, but again, Rey Mysterio is a guy that's been around from my childhood, since my childhood. And he's a Hall of Famer now. Like, he's like a veteran. And then 2024, you had, Paul Heyman. Think about ECW, you think of Paul Heyman. And then you think of what he did with Brock Lesnar and CM Punk. And even Curtis Axel, okay? You think about that stuff. And I was there at WrestleMania 40 for that, Hall of Fame induction. But it was this year where Triple H, Michelle McCool, like, those are people, we're getting into the era of, like, people from, like, the 2010s getting in, Like, usually it was, like, people from the 90s and early 2000s. But now it's, like, people from, like, when I was, like, really like prime wrestling, like 2010, 2011. So, and someone like Triple H, who was there for the 90s, but like I said, 2006, he was there, you know? He kind of missed out on 2007 because he had an injury, but 2008, when they went HD, he was back. And then he had that triple threat match at WrestleMania with Cena and Orton. 2009, he faced Orton again. 2010, you know, he was kind of like in the middle with DX, so he faced like Sheamus. 2011 and 2012, he faces The Undertaker. 2013, he faces Brock Lesnar. Then he takes a backseat role and does the whole authority thing with the Shield. And then it kept going on and on. So when I heard him make his speech, it's just like, wow, there's like no one left from my I guess I say my generation. And then there's literally not going to be anybody else that I know that's going to be left. I mean, the only people that are there now is Kofi Kingston, John Cena, Randy Orton, and R-Truth. CM Punk is back. But actively, and I don't give a damn about Rey Mysterio, but actively, those are pretty much it. Like, those 5 are it. And I'm thinking, like, is this how people back in the day felt when they saw Ric Flair go in, when they saw the 4 Horsemen go in? It's interesting to see how that plays out. You know what I'm saying? You don't really think about that, you know, when you're 16, 17 years old, but then 10 years down the line, it's like it starts to hit you now, you know? You hear voices like Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler on the commentary, but then when you don't hear them anymore, and now it's a new person, and then that new person becomes the old guy, and then the old guy works with a new guy, and then they become old for the next generation. So it's kind of astounding how that works, because I'm thinking, you know, how I feel now about Triple H being inducted and Michelle McCool being inducted and The Undertaker. Somebody else is going to feel like that when Roman Reigns gets inducted and Cody Rhodes gets inducted. Shoot, man, when Bianca Belair or Nia Jax gets inducted, it feels really strange. And I just wanted to put that out there for all my wrestling fans out there. And even, not even just with the WWE Hall of Fame, but with like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know, I was watching it recently because they had people from, I can't remember, I don't know if they did one, they announced people this year, but last year they had Mary J. Blige, Tribe Called Quest, Kool and the Gang, Ozzy Osbourne, Foreigner. You know what I'm saying? Now, I didn't grow up with some of these bands and artists initially, but I remember living, you know, with my mom and having her put in Mary J. Blige CDs in like the 2000s and singing it, and now she's like solidified for her legacy in music. And I'm sure, again, 10, 20 years down the line, when we see Usher, when we see Chris Brown, when we see, you know, like Drake, Kendrick, all these bands get in, you know, it's gonna be surreal. So let me know what you guys think about how that feels when people that you grew up listening to or watching in any form of entertainment get recognized for their contribution to their art, and how that makes you feel kind of seasoned, I would say. So thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
bank got me feeling like I'm Edge. Allegiance to the money is the only thing I pledge. Laughing at these niggas that be thinking they ahead. Predator on beats, I done came with infrared. Better know how much you worth, cause if not, niggas using you. Niggas hit the block and switch sides like the Rubik's Cube. Niggas wanna get a verse from me, but I'm acting mute. You ain't got no money, why you here is what I'm asking you. Got her chasing after me just like the Mari show. Heard that I was tagged, now she wanna be Miss Retro. Ain't the one. Got your girl out here frozen, need to let her go. Hit her off the top, turnbuckle like a Hardy bro.